Don't say I depart tomorrow, for even now I am still arriving. And that's the beginning of my favorite poem by Thich Nhat Hanh called Please Call Me by My True Names. Whenever you're on a retreat, whether it's a weekend retreat or a 3-year retreat, there's always a last day. And not only that, there's a tendency for human beings to kind of live sort of in the future. So in part of your mind is already packing up and figuring out your route home and all that other sort of stuff. So part of your practice today, be here, be with us now, practice one more time, get that kind of beginner's mind going again, of being able to be fresh, new, whole. So we're going to start with a guided meditation. So I want you to imagine that you are sitting in a field, a very large field. Maybe there's a tree, you're sitting under the shade of a tree, but you're alone. There are no people around you. And however that seems for you, maybe it's a beautiful sunny day, maybe there are a few scattered clouds. Maybe there are some mountains on the horizon, but you're there in this peaceful setting, just being. And now, you don't know where they have come from, but sitting in front of you right now are your parents. However you remember them as younger or how they are as they are now or however. And you say to them, may you be peaceful and happy. May you be well. May you be clear of mind. May your life be at ease. And they come and sit beside you. And now, and you don't know where they came from, sitting in front of you are your descendants, your children and grandchildren. And if you don't have them, or if you don't have biological ones, perhaps you have spiritual ones or professional ones, but they're sitting in front of you with this connection. And you say to them, may happiness be your life. May you be safe. May you be strong. May you be sane. And they come and sit beside you. And now in front of you are your very close friends. Maybe your partner in life. Maybe you've had several. That's fine. People who have supported you and have laughed with you and cried with you and have been part of your existence. So easy to relate to, enriching your life in so many ways and so many turns. And you say, may you be filled with peace. May you be filled with love. May your mind always be clear. May your soul fly. And then they too come and sit beside you. And now in front of you are your other relatives, people that you connect with in your family, your blood family for wherever they're from. They have this magical connection, even if you haven't seen them for a couple of months or a couple of years, you have that sort of special bond. May you be filled with kindness. May you be filled with love. May you be filled with compassion. May you always be safe. And they come and sit beside you. I don't know if I mentioned, but this is a very large field. And now sitting in front of you are all your teachers and benefactors. There's your high school algebra teacher. There's your piano teacher when you were in first grade. There's your football coach from college. There's someone who taught you how to make cupcakes. Someone who taught you physics. Someone who taught you the Dharma. All these people who have shared their wisdom and knowledge, and through their effort and kindness have enriched your life. And your heart fills with gratitude. And you say, may you have love, may you have peace, may you have safety, may you have happiness. And they too come and sit beside you. And now perhaps the people who have been difficult for you, a few who have rubbed you the wrong way, who, because of their particular suffering, have watered your seeds of suffering. And even though we often seem that we are in conflict with these people, we all know they have this great spark of divinity, this Buddha nature. We all know that they wish to be happy and avoid suffering, just like you, just like all these other people sitting with you. And with an open heart, you say, I wish you joy. I wish you peace. I wish you health. I wish you love. I wish you safety. And they too come and sit beside you. And now all of those kind of neutral people in your life come around. Old schoolmates, next door neighbors, grocery store clerks, baristas, so many people that we have this light touch with every day. We seldom peel back the barrier and look at their humanity and realize what beautiful gems they are, how they too wish to be happy and avoid suffering. They too share your heritage. They too wish to be happy, avoid suffering. They too wish to shine. And you say to them, I am hoping you find your brilliance. I am hoping you find peace and health and connection and happiness and safety. And they too come and sit beside you. And now the field fills. Did I tell you it was a very big field? All 7.5 billion of the people on the planet are on your field now. They go out to the horizon. All of these people, in the various ways that they look and talk, they all share 99.8% of your DNA. They're all you in various manifestations, in various forms. And one of them, perhaps a first people from Canada, perhaps a businessman from France, perhaps a peasant farmer from the East. Somebody comes and sits in front of you. And you know, despite the difference in culture and the difference in language, you and that person are the same. And you say, may you be filled with love and kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be happy. And now, field fills even further. All the people who ever lived and all who ever will live. Did I tell you it was a very big field? Are all around you, connecting with you, breathing the same air, in the same space, right here at this time. And someone from 7 or 70 or 700 generations ago comes out of the crowd and sits in front of you. And even though you're not sure you know why, you know that this person is your ancestor. Somebody who has lived a different life, but has passed on both in their genetic material, but also in their hopes, dreams, and aspirations. They have passed on to you this particular life. You say, no matter how different our clothes, our culture, our language was, we are linked through time and space. Here we are. I hope your life was easy. I hope you found joy and contentment, even if there were some bumps in it. I hope that you were able to join your other friends and all of the other humanity and get that connection. I am grateful that you have bequeathed this wondrous being to me. May you be well. And he comes and sits beside you. And now someone out from another corner of the crowd comes and sits in front of you. And you don't know why, you know this. They come to you from 7 or 70 or 700 generations hence. And they're in front of you right now. And somehow you know this is your descendant, whether it is biologically or spiritually or professionally. You don't know exactly what that is about either, but there they are. And you say, whatever place you are in, I hope you have found peace and happiness. Whatever place you are in, I hope you are well. I'm sure there are wonderful marvels in your world, but I hope that you are able to maintain this beautiful, precious human birth, this great humanity, this wondrous time that we have on this planet, this one precious life we're all given. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be happy. Good morning, everyone. Wait, I can get back to where I was now. Yeah. See if we can get me in the picture here. Oops. If you're interested, of course, every time I do that meditation, it's a little bit different. But if you go on our website under meditation downloads, you can get that particular meditation called Expanding Circles. So at any rate, how's everybody doing today? We're all still here. How was that thunder snow last night? Pretty much. I know that my particular hermitage was shaking, so it was really very interesting. A good time to be mindful.
We had it here too in Milwaukee.
Oh my goodness, how wonderful.
Yeah, it was something.
Yeah. So what has happened here? There we go. So I'd like to talk today about, okay. Did I get to, I thought I had the screen share on. All right, but we'll get this back. It's only day 3. I'm finally getting the hang of this. There you go. This is a quote from an Islamic cleric of a couple centuries ago. God deposited within man knowledge of all things, then prevented him from perceiving what he had deposited within him. This is one of the divine mysteries which reason denies and considers totally impossible. So the idea among many spiritual traditions, including the Zen Buddhism that I practice, is that there is an inherent wisdom that in this particular Abrahamic faith, God placed in you. And that somehow you have this thing where it's been hidden somehow. I like to think of it as your consciousness, your mind is like this big cocktail party. And somewhere in this cocktail party, there's someone kind of telling the truth. And you love to know who that is. It may be that you're in the corner of some place. It may be somebody whispering something. It may be, any of a variety of things that may be going on, but there's so much noise that you can't really hear that. What I find happens in a lot of situations is that people, including in Buddhist paths, just pile more and more on top of it, which is like inviting more people into your party. And as if someone might have the truth. I'm not sure that's kind of the way to do it. For the most part, I like to think that we are doing a practice, whatever your practice is, of subtraction rather than addition. You already have a lot of cognition, a lot of knowledge, and there's just and the explosion of knowledge is really great. But we need to sort of wrap around and let go of a lot of those sorts of things, that the actual knowledge we have, or at least the electric energy of our nervous system, is very much blocking this great truth that we can get to, that is involving things like peace and unity and all other sorts of things. So let me just see, and so this is one of those talks I've actually never given before, and I'm not sure where we're going with it because I'm not sure how I all feel about all of this. This is a lotus, and in my tradition, we have a very wonderful saying by our root teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh. There's no mud, no lotus. The lotus is a beautiful flower. You can actually even eat the seeds. I don't know if you've ever done that, but it's kind of an interesting phenomenon. Just beautiful, beautiful blooms, and is really stunning when you see it. In many of the Plum Village monastic communities, they have a whole pond full of this. It's just amazing. But a lotus only grows in really thick, sticky mud. It really only grows in the kind of almost really foul-smelling, cruddy stuff that you wouldn't want. This is part of what Thich Nhat Hanh would say, is that without suffering, you can't get anywhere. In a traditional Buddhist hierarchy, in some places they think these are kind of real states. Among a lot of us, myself included, I just think these are variations of what any sentient being, including human beings, have it. There are kind of 6 levels. There's gods and jealous gods, and then there's humans, then animals, then the wonderful people I like to think of, wonderful creatures called hungry ghosts, and then hell beings. But anyway, not important exactly what all of those things are. But humans are the only ones that can make progress because we're the only ones that suffer enough. The gods don't have enough suffering in their life, and the animals don't have enough wisdom. So we are in this fortunate birth where we actually can kind of make that sort of progress. And the idea among many, many people in in Zen Buddhism is that there is a thing called enlightenment. And actually, I think more people, including one of the references I'll give you in the Christian condition, Christian situation for that, is also having the idea of enlightenment. And there have been often this kind of real mini debate about what's called gradual enlightenment, which is meaning doing your day-to-day stuff, or what is called sudden enlightenment, which happens like, at 12 o'clock, you're not enlightened, and at 12:01, something happens and boom, the world opens up to you. And we've been taught mostly that we really shouldn't even seek this. And I really kind of actually do have that kind of feeling about it. But I also am aware that this is something that people like to talk about and that people actually do seek. And so I really was very curious to know that some people had been exploring some neuroscience in this. Is there something that we might call enlightenment? Is there something actually that happens? And is there this sudden kind of flick of a switch that goes on with that? So here's my disclaimer. In my particular practice, I have had about a dozen experiences that we're going to get to Andrew Newberg in a second, who talks about that. I would call small e enlightenment experiences, where I actually wasn't even meditating for more than maybe half of them I was meditating, half of them I was doing other things. It actually seems very interesting when I'm driving in my car that a lot of this has happened, that something happens. Boom, something really changes really quickly. And you have this real burst of connection and openness, and everything seems really beautiful and together and that sort of thing. And those experiences for me only last about 5 or 10 minutes. And I've only had them about a dozen times, but I've had them. I've had these experiences, these really sudden things. And they're very congruent with my path. So I'm not sure if they really make me into a better person or do anything along those lines. But many people feel that those kinds of enlightenment experiences are really important for people. We don't really know that. In the whole Buddhist canon, the original things with talking about the Buddha's life, and there were a lot of people who talked about enlightenment experiences. The Buddha's one night that he had, a long night before he quote unquote became enlightened, was supposed to be an enlightenment single experience. His attendant Ananda, who was attendant for most of his teaching life, he never had that. And it was one of those really kind of things everybody in the sutras talking about. It was too bad about Ananda. He hasn't had enlightenment, even by the time the Buddha died at age 80, so a long time. So it's hard to know. Obviously, he was a very deep practitioner and things did well. But I'm very curious about that. There's also a few things that have been happening neurologically that look like this kind of enlightenment experience. And they're really worth kind of looking at and studying. So a couple of dimensions here, the ordinary versus the transcendent, or the historical versus the ultimate is what we would kind of call things in our particular Buddhist tradition, or the sacred versus the profane. The profane is, tables and chairs and lights and stuff like that. And the sacred is how they're all connected, almost as if you could see the molecules kind of vibrating and that sort of thing. Thich Nhat Hanh, on more than one occasion, has said that the sacred and the profane are exactly the same, so why go chase them? So that kind of thing is also happening. And there is a famous philosopher. He was actually a sociologist by the name of Durkheim that created the particular phrase homo duplex. Homo duplex is the two levels, like a home that's a duplex. And the first level is the profane, and the second level is the sacred. And it is something that people are expected to kind of climb up to, like a staircase. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that look like these kinds of things that are sudden enlightenment experiences. And, you know, in this group, there may be any of you might have had these kind of experiences. I don't know. I'm certainly not going to require anybody to share anything, but I'd be very curious. The more I kind of look at this, the more I realize that people having at least the small e experiences that I have are really not that rare. Having, you know, things like near-death experiences, which we'll go over, well, that's something else entirely. So the person who has done this here, let me see if I can reduce this here so you can see that. That's just a small e plus big E experiences. Andrew Newberg is a really wonderful, he actually has a really wonderful, great courses on the spiritual brain, which I recommend. It's a little older, so it doesn't have all the kinds of things that we might know a little bit later on, but he certainly is a very, very deep thinker with this. That with an enlightenment experience, there is a unity or connectedness. Everything seems to be connected. There's no separation. A little bit the way that Jill Bolte Taylor described her experiences after her stroke, where she said there was no boundary to my body. My body was connected to everything. I didn't really see a difference between, you know, the things in the room and my particular body. She knew that they all existed, but they all seemed to flow together. Intensity of experience, and that seems to be one of those things, that it seems to be a rather profound experience as compared to day-to-day existence. You really kind of know that it's happening. A sense of clarity and a new way of understanding. So what happens with many of these people who have these enlightenment experiences is their life is forever changed. It's not just changed in the particular moment, it's changed forever. And this is a very interesting kind of way of being that suddenly happens. This may be more about what many of the Buddhists were talking about when they were talking about those kind of enlightenment experiences. There's an idea of surrender and non-striving. This idea that you don't have to enter the rat race so much anymore. You don't have to try to do things. You just have to be open and connected with nature, and that's easier. This kind of new way of being and a change in consciousness. So it all sounds pretty cool. And there are certainly, the way that Andrew Newberg got involved with this is this is the modern age, of course. He put up a thing on his website and said, hey, if you've had an enlightenment experience, let me know about it. And well over 1,000 people gave their narratives. So there are clearly a lot of people that this has kind of happened to. And because it's kind of a rare and strange thing, maybe not everybody talks about it, and maybe it's happening more frequently than people think. So this is William James, and he was the first person to really kind of categorize these about 110 years ago. And he talked about this concept called the sacred staircase, which is that many people had this image of actually ascending a staircase to get to a different level of existence. And, you know, there is kind of that idea of enlightenment, also kind of an uplifting thing, is something that is also part of this particular journey. So one of the manifestations that is very much like this particular, and there are certainly more than 1,000, there are maybe in the 5,000 to 10,000 people who have written narratives about their near-death experience. And, you know, it's a very interesting phenomenon. The near-death experience happens near death, after all. It's usually when someone has become completely lost their heart rate and their breathing. There's no external movement whatsoever. And it usually starts with the person realizing that they have died. they hear somebody say, "Oh, we've lost him," or "Oh, he died." And these are places usually where these occur are settings like, emergency rooms and hospitals, although they certainly have happened at scenes of accidents as well. And then there is this kind of, it's not the only time you get this kind of massive downloading of memories, the life flashing before you. Boom, there it goes. It's really interesting, according to the people who have this, is they see and hear things that they didn't even know they had memories of, that kind of comes about, that, that were kind of buried, but all of a sudden there they are. And it must be an odd experience to be able to experience in a matter of seconds many things happening in your life. This is a very weird thing to happen, right? And you're leaving your body. At this time, their people are usually leaving their body. Now, if you're leaving your body and you have this flash of things in front of your life, I'm imagining sitting here right now in my organic body, it would sound really frightening, wouldn't it? Yet people aren't. People have kind of maybe a sense of really very, very deep calm, very, very deep calm. They travel to a light. Sometimes it's in a tunnel. And that I kind of experience, that kind of experience may be related to really how we ordinarily see. And then either at the end of the tunnel or along the tunnel, they meet other people. And meeting other people fall into two categories. Number one, people who have died before. So they often meet, say a good friend or a spouse or parents who have died, maybe a child sometimes. Other people, some people have even said that they meet people that they didn't know were dead, but there they are on this particular journey. And then there are other beings that have a more, different kind of thing, beings of light. They seem to be sort of supernatural. And then there seems to be this unbelievably great feeling of love and acceptance. They get to a border usually, and the border is considered, at least metaphorically, if not really, I'm not making any kind of statement one way or another about this, is they have to either cross over or go back. And most of the time, people don't make the decision to go back, but they are often told that they have to go back. So they are told by these beings, yeah, you're here, but it's not your time. You have to go back to your body, which actually a lot of these people were really annoyed by. They don't want to leave this wonderful place. They want to go back. And they do, and if they do end up returning, they return, directly into the body. The resuscitation goes on, and there's often a feeling at the end of, wow, that was really an amazing thing. They report it as being more real than this kind of life. All that stuff that happened was more real and more and very much more intense with that. And again, this has now happened and been documented thousands and thousands of times. So this is really kind of part of humanity. We certainly know many other people who have died, who have not had near-death experiences, or have almost died, who have not had near-death experiences. And we also know that near-death experiences can happen to people who don't actually become pulseless non-breathing. So people who have had a lot of exposure, say who have been kind of, lost in the wilderness or buried under an avalanche or things like that, have these kinds of experiences as well. So we have a question?
Well, I was just going to say, this last December.
Oh.
Thank you.
Oh boy, is that an old reference?
I just wanted to share that I went to a retreat just this last December in Sedona and heard Anita Morjani speak.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a near-death experience for 36 hours, went to the other side and came back and talks about it. Her books are wonderful, but her retreats are really amazing. And she describes what you were saying. Her time wasn't done. And she came back to do more energy work. She wants to set up energy centers around the world because she truly believes it's all about the energy that's clogging our bodies and all of that. But it was indeed fascinating. And what else was I going to say? Oh, I'm losing my thoughts. Oh, well, that's all I wanted to share. Oh,
Thanks.
She traveled with Wayne Dyer for 4.5 years, right before he died. She had cancer and weighed 85 pounds when she died. And she even saw her brother rushing here on a plane. She saw everything above and below and everyone she had ever known to die and all of that. It was fascinating and reassuring for what's to come.
Yeah. Thank you. That is one of those things, incidentally, that people, one of the real clear things that happen to people who have these experiences is that their fear of death completely disappears. Fear of death is gone. They are now perfectly accepting of that. Yes, go ahead, Mary.
Well, in the early 80s, talking about people that have done a lot of coaching on these matters, it was Shirley MacLaine. Remember Shirley? And she was she had past lives and things. But anyway, she had a seminar in Chicago that I went to, and this is really early, and 100 people were there, but you felt like you were Shirley's best friend, and it was really fantastic, very dramatic, movie-like. How she set up the experience. Anyway, goes back a long way.
Thank you. Any other comments? So much of this can be sort of explained physiologically. And so let me go break some of this down. When you lose vision, you lose peripheral vision. And if people have still a consciousness, a sight consciousness, of course, it would seem like a tunnel with a bright level area in the middle. We know this happens when people have just plain all the everyday sort of eye trauma. We also know that there is probably a tremendous, what we would call autonomic nervous system storm. Boom, everything is coming, everything is happening all at once. Your parasympathetic nervous system and your sympathetic nervous system are going great guns, and there's lots and lots of changes that goes on with that. One of the other things that people have postulated about, and this is kind of recent stuff, is, well, is the brain still active? I mean, after people lose their pulse and lose their breathing, is the brain still active? Now, what good old fashioned, American scientists did to do that is they started doing that to mice, but they were killing mice and checking their brain waves, and their brain waves kept going on a little bit. Somebody actually gave an informed consent for this. This was very interesting. So there was a person who was a non-resuscitative person. He had a and he had whatever, I forget what his primary illness was, but he had a subdural hematoma. That's a bleeding on the outside of the brain. And they were doing surgery on him, and they knew that he was not going to be resuscitated if this didn't go well, if he quote unquote died on the table. But he also gave, and his family also gave, permission to record his brainwaves. So they did. He died on the table, and they required, now, there's a lot of caveats about this particular patient. On a certain number of medications, had a brain disease to begin with, et cetera. But he had brain activity for 15 minutes, including these things called gamma bursts, which are usually bursts of kind of, what can I say? They are often found in people having enlightenment experiences, like Tibetan monks have lots of gamma bursts. So it was really kind of interesting. So we do know, at least physiologically, the brain is active even without a blood supply, even without any oxygen, for a while. Was this guy typical 15 minutes? I don't know. I mean, maybe people will find out more about this or not. Also, in the kind of interesting part about all of this is that the place that clearly wouldn't be going where you'd be happier is the default mode network is clearly going to be shut down. And so all of those kinds of things that the default mode network are doing certainly would give you that idea of connection and bliss and all that other sort of stuff. So it's perfect. Some of what happened, the things that happen with NDEs are all reasonably explainable by physiology. Maybe it's completely a physiologic event. Sativa, which is a plant and it has hallucinogen, ketamine and mescaline have all been known to induce NDEs, the things that are just like NDEs. So we know that there's a physiologic thing with this. But maybe something really does happen. There are some things that are very difficult to explain. For example, many people report that when they leave their body, they see what the nurse was writing down on the particular thing that was going on with that. They, again, meet people who in their conscious life they didn't know had died, and there they were. They had died. Oh, Fred, I didn't know you had died, that kind of thing. These things are kind of hard to explain. No one knows what goes on with all of that. One of the more interesting things that is happening in several emergency rooms, this is mostly emergency rooms now, is on a shelf, on a high shelf, they're putting a picture. And it's usually, and no one knows what the picture is. It's usually they get some flunky, like a janitorial staff, hey, put a picture up here. And don't tell us anything. So no one who's doing any of the research knows what this picture is. But if you leave the body, you'll see the picture. And so if someone leaves the body and actually sees the picture, that would be very interesting. And that's kind of one of those things that tends to be going on. So no one really knows. I know that a person who has become very popular and has written a lot of books talking about how important and real this experience is a neurosurgeon by the name of Eben Alexander, who had, a really horrible disease, bacterial meningitis, and did that. He died he essentially died for I don't know how many minutes and had this kind of experience and came back forever changed and wrote the book, Proof of Heaven. This is what's happening. I'm not sure. I'm a little bit skeptical. I still have the idea that things may be changing one way or another with that. But I am also of the opinion that whether it is truly a gateway to another world or not, it is clearly a transformative experience. Clearly transformative. These people have really gone up that staircase to a different level, having all of this sort of experience. They have all of the things that have been described by both Christian mystics and by Eastern mystics of an enlightenment experience. They see a connection everywhere. They don't fear death. They live a calm, happier life. They are really changed people. And the people who are around people who have near-death experiences have also had that kind of an idea that, like, that John, he was really an irascible, we didn't like him at all. And then he had this near-death experience, and now he's like, the saint of all saints. Really very interesting how that kind of all happens. Interestingly also is there have been several atheists who have had near-death experiences, and none of them, I think there's like 4, have actually said, well, I now believe in an afterlife, or I now believe in heaven and that sort of thing. But they do recognize the experience. And there's also people who do this often come back and say they are, quote unquote, more spiritual, but less religious. That's a common meme anyway in present, I think in the present modern. I run into literally a zillion people who say they are spiritual but not religious. And that even those people who become more spiritual, they're involved with more meditation, they may be involved more in prayer. They tend to follow less the institutional organizations, the churches and synagogues and mosques that they were involved with, but are really still willing to connect. So it's a very interesting thing, the kind of research is going on with that. And I'm really taken by the whole thing, and I'm keeping kind of an open mind about it. Right brain, left brain stuff. This is one of those things in my mind, and I could be wrong about this, that we have a very peculiar thing that happened. And because we have a left brain that wants to be certain, we write a story that says that's what it is. And that could be either one. So some people who deny that there could be anything like an afterlife, anything that goes on with that, will write the story. It's all physiological. There it is. Boom. And they've got evidence to support that. And they get into their left brain, and the left brain says that's it. And it doesn't matter what you show me, that's still the way it is. And then the other people who really believe that this truly is a glimpse into an afterlife or to another existence are also very staunch with that and stick with it. And it's really very interesting. This is one of those things in my consciousness that I resist that kind of thing. I like to sit in the mystery of wonder. That's how I sit in my right brain. I say, don't know. Isn't it interesting? It's a mystery. Really wonderful thing. But actually, after you read some of these things, you say, hey, I want to have a near-death experience. Not that I'm going to actually sort of do that, but yeah. Yeah, sure.
So I don't mean to get personal. And if this is too personal, just feel free to say, you know what, Sharon, I'll think on that. So how do you sit with reincarnation?
Well, I think you can get the same sort of thing. There's evidence that reincarnation occurs, but then there's a whole lot of evidence that sounds like it would be really kind of a difficult thing to, I mean, if there are literally billions of souls that are died, where are they all? If they're reincarnated, have everybody got one of those going along with them? And if there is, how come we don't know about them? Why would it be, and so there's all kinds of document you can go with that. So yes, I am open to the idea of reincarnation, but I'm not necessarily sure that I kind of have a belief in it. I'm saying, yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. Yeah.
But when the process actually involves identifying artifacts
Yeah.
that a 2, 3, 4-year-old child would have no understanding of, that sort of is.
I don't know, and I'd have to see how that all comes about. So let's say we have 50 kids. Let's say there's 50 kids. And of these 50 kids, we think they might have reincarnation, and we take them to have a whole bunch of artifacts. And 49 of them say, I don't know what's going on. But the 50th says, yes, by chance. That may be what happens. You only hear about the things when people actually do that. You don't hear about people trying to prove people that are reincarnated that it doesn't happen. You don't hear that kind of stuff. So if you only hear the one side, how can you tell? But anyway, I can see we could get into a real debate about this, and kind of don't want to. I want to say, yeah, I'm saying, let's just sit with the wonder of it. Let's just sit with the wonder of it. But people will find this is your left brain. Your left brain is going to try to pull you in to solidify it and say, yes, I believe very solidly in reincarnation, or no, I do not believe in it very solidly. I think it's a better place. This is one of many, 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 many things that are part of our world that I think are open to just being open. Yeah. Your apparatus is way too complicated.
One of the interesting things about the physiological explanation for NDEs is that there is, or at least was, a direct parallel in the electronics world. This isn't much true anymore, but in earlier times, like the days when we all had, big CRT televisions, there were little pieces of electronics in there that would store energy. And after you turned off the power, that energy would gradually dissipate, and it would work through all the other circuitry and do things. So I think I may choose to remain in the mystery, but I think I think the direct parallel is obviously true, that well, let me rephrase that. We know that there's a lot of electrical energy up here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if all the power gets shut off, it's still going to be there for a little while, and it's still going to take time to dissipate.
Yeah.
I would hope that that's not all there is to it, but it seems quite reasonably possible.
Yeah. Well, thank you. The more important part about this that I think is kind of the take, we're not going to have NDEs, most of us, and that sort of thing, but we will maybe in our lives have some of these either small E or large E enlightenment experiences. And this kind of follows that. So the next thing are psychedelics. How did I find an interesting story about my personal life? How did I find out about the default mode network? Somebody was talking about an article back around 2008, 2009, and said, you know, Paul, I read an article about LSD, and it says it shuts off the default mode network. To which I said, what's the default mode network? I didn't know at that time. And then I discovered a lot about that. So the ingredients, LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, plant-based things that are serotonin released. And then there's also DMT and ayahuasca. Actually, ayahuasca is DMT, but in a different form, are multiple transmitters. They're, what we would almost call MAO inhibitors. And that's a fancy long term that maybe people don't know, but it just affects a whole bunch of neurotransmitters. We know that there can be some real kind of spiritual experiences with that. So one of the things that's interesting about that is that in the 50s and 60s, before Richard Nixon called Timothy Leary the most dangerous person in the world, and psychedelics went underground for 30 years, they were researching this and finding, and anybody who has been through the 12-step program or anybody else who has had problems with addiction know how difficult that is to treat in any way. But they were taking people and giving them these psychedelics, and they were curing alcoholism at a rate of 40%. That's like astonishing. I mean, my goodness. And usually with just one or two episodes. Fear of death was being taken care of that way. People who had depression were starting to be treated this way. All of these things were starting to happen. And then, of course, the whole thing happened in the counterculture, and a lot of things happened that were really a problem. There is one of the things about shutting down the default mode network would be all of that kind of thing that would go on with, being connected to others, etc., and feeling that there was a unity in the world, and that obviously, if you're talking about something that's a sudden change, well, a psychedelic is a sudden change. And again, they're presently being redone, and I think somebody may know this better than I do. I think Oregon, they now can do psychedelics as real treatment. Oregon's always in front of everything. They're the first people that did, assisted death and things like that. So I think that's in Oregon, but I think it's coming. There are people now doing, let's put it this way. If you decided for some reason because of your depression or addiction that you wanted to get into psychedelics, you could probably find somewhere that there's a now treatment plan done experimentally that some university is doing. This is now really being gone on in this kind of second wave. Yeah. They're doing some, yeah. Yeah. So UW-Madison's doing this. It's not a surprise. It's coming all over the place. And one of the things they found, both positive and negative, is when they were starting doing this in the 50s and 60s, is the set and the setting makes a really huge difference to whether this is effective or not. So in the 50s, with a lot of these things we were doing this, they would do things like, well, here, go home and take this. And of course, if people weren't aware, let's say you had a spouse or something that suddenly you've just taken LSD and you didn't know what LSD was, and your spouse is starting to talk about the wonderful daisies that are growing out of the wall. I mean, you'd be a little concerned. and now we know that the best thing to do is dealing with all this. People might have known the guy. He's a big plant guy, a big food guy. Michael Pollan. Michael Pollan wrote this is a terrific book, best book on psychedelics I can think of, How to Change Your Mind. And he took it from the standpoint of, he wasn't a scientist and he wasn't particularly a spiritual guy. So he went off on this. He figured he was just a reporter. He was a perfect guy to look at this. So he did. And it's a wonderful book talking about his experiences, both talking to a lot of different people, but also experiencing this himself. So one of the things that, one of the experiments that happened was the Marsh Chapel study. This is kind of a hallmark in psychedelics. It's also called the Good Friday experiment. Harvard Divinity School, which Timothy Leary was part of Harvard University, so he was part of this. On Good Friday in 1961, they took 20 divinity students, and while the Good Friday service was going in the upstairs of the chapel, they were in the basement of the chapel, these 20. The sermon and all the other kinds of things were being, sort of broadcasted down so they could hear. Apparently the person who gave the sermon is a very stirring speaker. And it was a 50-50 thing. Half people got, I believe it was psilocybin, and half of them got niacin. And niacin was there because if you give people large amounts of niacin, you get kind of dry mouth, restless, twitchy stuff that is a side effect that's similar to some of the side effects you get with psilocybin. So they wanted trying to blind it. But if you think of something that would be like the most difficult thing to actually have a blind control of, you definitely know you got the drug or didn't get the drug. And one person had a really bad experience, really bad experience. One person had, maybe it was hard to call the good experience, but he was hearing the sermon downstairs, and this person was saying something like, we must take Christ to the people. We must go out and, do that. And he decided to do it right then and there. Yeah, we got to do that. So he's trying to leave the chapel, and they wouldn't get him to leave the chapel. And he was really belligerent. I said, but I've got to go out and spread the word of Christ. And he felt like he had to do it. So they actually had to give him Thorazine to calm him down. One of the 10 people who got this was Houston Smith. And if you don't know who Houston Smith is, he's written a lot of books. He's written these really encyclopedic books about all these faith traditions in the world. But he's one of the people that was part of the Marsh Chapel study. So moving ahead to 1986, now 25 years later, somebody finally decided to track these down, and they tracked down 7 people who were of the 10. The one person that had the bad experience refused to participate. One person had died, and was the other reason another person wouldn't do it. But they had the other 7, and they, this stuff wasn't available to them at all. They had every one of these 7 people said this was one of the most spiritual experiences of their lives. That this was like a real thing. Most of them were still in ministry and hadn't really opened up, that they said that this was just very profound and really changed their lives. Even the guy who had to be hit with the Thorazine, he had that. Of the interesting experience, maybe because he talked to his classmates, none of them had ever taken psilocybin or LSD or anything ever again after that one episode. One of the things that happened after that was one of the people in the control group, maybe because he was talking to a bunch of people, he went out and illegally got LSD and did it on his own. But he also had this profound spiritual experience. And this idea, things changed in the brain. And again, shutting off the default mode network would clearly get rid of that I, that selfing dialogue that we have, and be able to be open to more experiences. So it's a very open question about that, but many of the things that happen with psychedelics, and it's definitely a dangerous thing. Well, it's dangerous in this manner. What people have found, even in the new research, is even under really, really good circumstances, you still can get a bad trip. You definitely can minimize it by making sure the set and setting is good. Nowadays, people are interviewed extensively. They have specific people that are trained to be with these people, everything else like that, but things can still go wrong. But this isn't kind of one of those things. And these people in the Marsh Chapel study were definitely changed. They definitely kept seeing the world very similar to the people with NDEs. They would say, yeah, I see a connection. Everything, the world is beautiful. I'm just so calm about this in nature. And interesting, not as striking as with the NDEs, but there was much less fear of death. Interesting thing. So it's an open book about that. One of my, and one last thing, and this is completely an anecdotal story, but it really struck me as very, so one of my kind of heroes from the standpoint of writings is a guy by the name of Stephen Batchelor. He's written a lot of really interesting books. And he has spent time both as a Zen monastic and a Tibetan monastic, but he lives in England, and they do a lot of stuff together, and it's really, really very, very interesting with the groups that he's with. He wrote a book I think it was called Solitude. It's his latest book. And he mentioned that after taking ayahuasca in one of these kind of settings with one person who does the thing with ayahuasca, that he gave up drinking for good. Gave up drinking for good. I mean, all of his Tibetan meditation, all of his teaching, all of his readings, all of his intellectual kind of thought about this, all those things, he never gave up drinking. But he took ayahuasca and he gave up drinking. I think that's interesting. I don't know what that means. But, it really was kind of a sort of a profound thing. So any other comments about that? Or all right. So here's my theory. And again, boy, I'm so far out of anywhere being research or anything else, that all of these experiences, NDEs or normal kinds of, well, I shouldn't say normal, but spontaneous enlightenment experiences, like Andrew Newberg has. Oh, another parenthetic. Andrew Newberg calls his enlightenment experience infinite doubt. That doesn't sound like so much fun, does it? Infinite doubt. Yeah, D-O-U-B-T. Isn't that interesting? And that's so right brain, isn't it? I mean, because the right brain never comes to a decision. It's like, yeah, well, maybe yes, maybe no, that. And it's kind of an interesting thing that he sort of experiences. Or the NDEs is kind of a reboot. So we don't have a lot of experience because we don't clearly can't do an MRI on a person who's having an NDE, because that's all related to blood flow, and you don't have any blood flow. Whatever else is going on, you don't have any blood flow. And they have done this with people with psychedelics, but they haven't had any chance to do things with people who have had these spontaneous experiences like Andrew Newberg has. He has, though, enough of a memory that he went down and he did that, and he found that both his left frontal and his left parietal lobe had markedly decreased energy. So boom, so I'm beginning to think that these transcendent experiences are similar to what I get from the tech people. So what do you get if your computer's just not working and you call up the tech person at work and stuff? Yeah, turn it off and turn it on, Reboot it, see what happens. And I think that may be what's happening with these things. I think that there's something about a reboot that kind of clears people out with this sort of thing. It's certainly a wonderful kind of thing and a profound thing to kind of go with. So here's a really interesting sort of question. Can you do something to do this? Can you prepare can you do something that will actually make it more likely or less likely to have an enlightenment experience other than nearly die? I mean, I'm not recommending anybody nearly die. The idea is that certain things like movement and ritual, for example, many of the people that seem to have enlightenment experiences are Sufis. And that's exactly what Sufis do. They do a lot of movement and they do a lot of rituals, and they seem to have enlightenment experiences. Many of these enlightenment experiences happen out in nature. So you often hear people say, walking along a path in their, kind of favorite little nature preserve, they're right next to a stream, and wow, they have this experience. So nature is really kind of a positive about that. And clearly, if you're a regular meditator, you're more likely to have this kind of stuff as well. But those things are all good on their own accord, whether you have an enlightenment experience or not. They're all really good. The ritual part, maybe yes, maybe no, depends on how the rituals go with that. Rituals in general are very intra-group binding, So we don't have much rituals at the mindfulness community of Milwaukee, but we do bow and we do say little phrases when we strike the bell and things. That's about as far as we go with rituals. Those things are somewhat binding because when I go to Thich Nhat Hanh groups I've been to ones in Tucson and Costa Rica and Palm Springs, California, and Atlanta, Georgia, and Washington, D.C., and they all kind of do the same thing, so I feel like I'm home, I'm part of the group. But they may be somewhat distancing from people who are out-group people. But the rest of these things clearly are things that are kind of going all the time. So I think my Dharma door, or the question for it is, to do the art of non-striving. It is so interesting to me. I watched myself do this. So I've had this small enlightenment experience about a dozen times. You can imagine since the time I had signed up and talked to the people here at the Christine Center, I'm going to do this weekend retreat. And now, what do you think my mind has been doing? Boy, I hope I have one of those. I hope I have one of those in January or February, and then I can talk about it when it's fresh in my mind. And of course it didn't happen. Of course it didn't happen. And actually, in my own particular experience, it really is one of those things that there was nothing, at any time that happened, I was not thinking about anything in particular to make them happen. I just was there. I would also say that there's something I'm an N of one, and people who are, in medicine say an N of one means nothing. So I just take this for what it's worth. I'm also a person that has two different conditions that are sudden onset conditions. What do I mean by that? The worst sudden onset condition would be seizures. Everybody knows you're going, boom, boom, seizures. But there are a couple of other things where things very suddenly happen. One is migraine headaches. And I don't suffer from migraine headaches anymore, but I did once upon a time. I had this one thing where I had migraine headaches, and then I started to practice. And as I practiced, my migraine headaches dissolved and sort of went away. I haven't had one in 20 years. I mentioned this to my partner, who's an ophthalmologist, and she very brightly said, "Oh, that's just because your arteries are all hard now and they won't go into spasm." So talk about somebody who's like ruining your enlightenment experience here. And the other thing is I've suffered from a panic disorder, also thinking I haven't had for 20 years. And panic disorders are things where you're okay, boom, you're not okay, and you're not okay in a terrible way. So I'm just saying that I have at least two different things in my mind that are primed to suddenly happen, neither one of them good. That may be not necessarily related to my practice or anything else, why I get these very irregular little bings that are just kind of wonderful, very likely neurologic changes that are happening. And so there's probably a individual predisposition who could possibly not be more prepared for an enlightenment experience than Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, and yet he never gets one. So everything about that is different. However, if you were to say, as I get along further along the path, and I have less of a sense of self, and this is all happening to me, I have to ask myself, how much of that's because of these little enlightenment experiences, and how much of that is because of my regular practice, being with Sangha, doing things like this? I would say and again, how do I know? I can't know because I can't go back in time and split myself in two. I would say it's like 5% the enlightenment experience and 95% the other stuff. So I admit that the enlightenment experience was pretty cool, and it kind of helped reinforce the other stuff that was going on with me. But in my life, I think I'd be pretty much in the same place whether I had that or not. And that's just me kind of going with that. There's a wonderful phrase in Zen Buddhism that says, before studying Zen, mountains were mountains and rivers were rivers. After studying Zen, mountains are no longer mountains and rivers are no longer rivers. That's the second of the three. I'll get to the third phrase in a little bit. And I think that kind of explains a little bit of that kind of enlightenment experience. It's not that mountains and mountains aren't meant river, but you see that they are not just the river. The river is connected to everything. The mountain is connected to everything. You're connected to everything. That exit sign is connected to everything. All that sort of stuff gets to be real apparent after you've been studying Zen. I think whether you have a large enlightenment experience or a small one or none, that all kind of happens. And then the third phrase is, after studying Zen, mountains are mountains again and rivers are rivers again. Or the idea that we are out among people. We know that the mountain is a thing that comes together with non-mountain elements. We do know that, but we also know it's a mountain. We know the river comes together because of non-river elements, but we know it's a river. And we know that individual people come together from non-person elements, but we also know that they're people, and you kind of get to work with that. The saying I heard recently was that a good practitioner goes and practices in the mountains. And one of the things that we find that is really kind of peculiar, especially as we talk about all of the stuff with connection as being part of a spiritual path, is the idea that there are a lot of people, both in the Christian, and I don't know about other traditions so much, but in the Christian tradition and in the Buddhist tradition, of hermits. Yeah, they go live in the mountains by themselves. It doesn't sound very connected, but I've been told that many of these hermits, after being there for a while, have to come back to traditionally what they say in the East is the marketplace. So you live among people when you're really kind of gotten your enlightenment experience and processed it, you come back and live among everyone else. So this is the first time I've ever really talked about transcendence and an experience like this. And again, in the Plum Village tradition, we almost never talk about this. And I wish we would. I'm hoping that I can open a dialogue with some people and see what this is about. Because if there are monastics, for example, who are having enlightenment experiences, they certainly don't tell us. And, and a few people that I have had talks with who have seemed to have it just like I do. I have these little blip enlightenment experiences, not the couple of hour-long thing that the other people do. So of interesting way. So I have one last meditation exercise that this is your chance to become enlightened. Now, you got to do this last exercise. It might work for you. So go get them. It's like, who is having breakfast? Yeah, we're having breakfast this morning, and we're talking about this story about, I want patience and I want it right now. Anyway, but I do believe that idea about wanting something really hard, like I said, after all my years of practice, you think I would know better. But the last 2 months was like, boy, I hope I have one of those experiences. I really hope, I really hope, I really hope. There's a wonderful, Zen is really good too, because it's got these really great 30-second stories. This is one of them that help illustrate it. A man goes to a Zen master who is well-renowned. And the student asked the Zen master, if I practice with you, how long will it take me to achieve enlightenment? And the Zen master says 10 years. And the student says, boy, I don't know that I got to talk to you about something. I have an ill parent, my father, I need to get back to this farm eventually. I have, some other people in my life that are really important to me. And I really want to do this, but I really have to 10 years is just too long. So how about this? I will be your most diligent student. If you ask somebody to do something, I will do it twice as hard. You ask me to do a work or a chant or anything else, I will do it my best. If you have any kind of little task that needs to be done that you think is that I will do it. I will be your hardest working, most diligent student. If I do that, how long will it take to attain enlightenment? And the Zen master said, 20 years. Or the thing that my teacher talks about is if you're, say, growing, he likes to talk about corn plants. And as a matter of fact, during one of his 3-week retreats, I was watching this video with all of his 3-week retreats. He actually, very first day, planted a seed of corn and watched it grow there. But he talks about, the corn plant's coming up and, wow, it's coming up. That's really good. Maybe it's not coming up quick enough. I know. I'll pull on it a little bit and kind of get it to go. Doesn't work. We kind of have the idea. So my feeling about whether you wish to have an enlightenment experience or don't wish to have an enlightenment experience is kind of irrelevant as opposed to practice. And in our practice, it means just being, just doing the practice without expectation, and that's a hard one, right? You mean I'm supposed to take a whole lot of my life and sit on a cushion and follow my breath, and I'm not expected to think anything's going to happen? That sounds like a great idea. Where do I sign up for that? But it's interesting. The more, and I think this happens to me personally when I started out as a striver, When I first started doing practice, I had charts. I had little charts. I did so much loving kindness today. I did so much Vipassana today, I would keep track of all of this. I would say how many hours. I would add up at the end of the month, how many hours. Talk about being like a nutty person. And the longer I got with all of that and the more I kind of gave up those things, the better off things went. So I had to get hit over head by reality that it isn't working. Just do the practice. And so I'm hoping that I can give you that wisdom too. So any other questions before we get to our last practice or comments? Yes. Microphone.
My question isn't as relevant as I thought it would be, as I thought it would be before I came here, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Sure.
Okay, are there the studies that have been done of meditators of different traditions?
Yeah, that's really a difficult one to do. There have been, but no one knows what to make of it. It seems that the centering prayer and regular, what we call shamatha meditation, Vipassana meditation, and compassion meditations. Those are the ones that have been traditionally studied. They all seem to be about the same. They all seem to do the same thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's enough. Thank you.
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Just some people say that these little enlightenment experiences, of whatever we call them, we can call them grace, and they just happen like an accident.
Yeah.
When we don't expect them. But our practices, we can do those to make ourselves accident prone.
Yes, that's a very good way. I like that. Can I use that in my next talk there?
Certainly.
I'll quote you.
I got it from somebody else. So that's
I'll quote you. This weird guy named Wade told me this one.
Wade, the wandering microphone. Who wanted the
And
Well, I've had some small enlightenment experiences and some reincarnation experiences. And of course, the meditation is fundamental, you know, to put you in not a state of mind to build you up, I guess, to put you in a place where those things are more likely to happen. But like you just sort of alluded to, these things aren't really mentioned in sanghas or with leaders. In the groups I've been in a few different sanghas over the years. And people are really reluctant to talk about enlightenment moments or reincarnation or anything bordering on the mystical or psychedelic or anything like that. And I just find it really curious that, you know, at least in the groups I've been in, Thich Nhat Hanh groups mostly, or Vipassana groups, that they just don't want to go there. They don't want to have that discussion. And so I've had a few, you know, discussions with members of the groups off to the side who come from more mystical traditions, perhaps Native American people, things like that. But I think it's an important part of Buddhist tradition in Asia. And there's a book I read recently called The Shamanic Bones of Zen that just came out by a Zen a master, a Black woman, who also has mystical experiences, and she says that the space that the meditation creates allows these things to come about more often. Yeah. And so, but I just find it curious. I know Thich Nhat Hanh didn't really talk about, or didn't often talk about reincarnation directly or get into the whole debate about it, you know. Yeah. And so it's really your current life, whatever, is more important. The way you live your life right now is more important than any of this stuff. Yeah. But I just find it interesting that it's almost verboten not to talk about these things. So. Yeah.
Well, I think we talked to the Dalai Lama.
I want people to hear you.
I said if we spoke to the Dalai Lama, and he might not be Zen, but I think he would be very confident and comfortable in his position of which particular Dalai Lama he is.
Yeah. Well, I want to make one little kind of historical thing about this is that as this happens in every spiritual tradition, and it happened in Buddhism, there were no clergy when the Buddha died, but there rapidly became clergy, right? The people who kind of knew and the people who didn't know. And so whether they had true enlightenment experiences or not, if you wanted to quote unquote get ahead on that ladder, you said you did. And so people have often, traditionally throughout Buddhism, have said the people who said they were enlightened were power grabbing, and that may be true. And I think that maybe still resonates through for a lot of people, which is the people who says they're enlightened just as elevating themselves and wants to be seen as something greater. And that may be part of the problem. And of course, we egalitarian Westerners definitely don't want to touch that particular third rail. So that may be part of it, but you're right. I wish there was a more open dialogue in the Plum Village tradition about this. Yeah. I mean, because we really know they happen. I mean, you know, there are just thousands and thousands of people giving these testimonies. They can't all be diluted, or they can't be diluted in that particular way. Then there must be something there. They all seem to be, you know, kind of rational people who, you know, hold jobs and raise families and do all this other sort of stuff. So I believe there's something to it. So, yeah. Anyone else? Mary in the back.
No birth, no death. No birth, no death. I mean, I think that
Yeah.
Ty does.
Ty says no birth, no death. Yeah.
Closer. Yeah. And that question, are you sure? But I don't know, are we in our left brains too much? And also, that, I don't know, there's just so much that Ty has said. And thank you for speaking to your own experiences. We didn't talk about consciousness, and that sort of might tap into
Yeah.
where we are when we're not in this physical container that we're in right now.
Mhm.
And I think it's amazing. And also the idea of energy, because when you talked about the pharmacology, and she was speaking to the pharmacology at UW-Madison, and someone else is talking about the electricity of the heart. I mean, it's this idea of energy, and also the interconnection and interbeing. So I think a lot of these ideas that we're talking about are sort of, yes, in the Plum tradition. Maybe it's all about they don't want to be misperceived. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's all a big question, right? We're living the questions. We
Right.
don't have the answers.
We're living the question. And actually, one of the problems that we sometimes get with our Western mind is that we put people in categories. So some of you, some of your left brains, hopefully you're keeping your left brains in check. Some of you would leave this thing here, this meeting, and you all heard the same words. Some people will say, well, Paul Norton really believes that near-death experiences are a portal to another world and to something else is going on. And some of you will say, oh, Paul Norton believes that near-death experiences are just physiologic things. Your brain wants to put me in a category. I mean, I'm not taking offense at that. I'm just saying that's what your brain wants to do. For me to even say, I'm sitting in the middle and I'm uncertain, makes you feel uncertain. It's just one of those things. We, besides wanting to have our own minds be made up, we want to make other people's minds made up. And that's interesting, isn't it? And we can misperceive people by saying, they really believe that. How many times have you heard that? Well, they're saying that, but they really believe this, because I can kind of tell because, say all Republicans kind of believe this, or all Buddhists believe this. So even though they're saying this is what I really think is going on. We like putting people into categories, and we can misperceive people that way. So.
But there's also keeping.
Look. Yeah. It's all perfectly, and actually I'm very fond of people who have an open mind. I really like the idea of don't know Zen. There it is, don't know. And even among people who have should maybe quote unquote know better, who study Zen, think, yeah, I mean, the people who study Zen should really know the answers and they should give them to us. Why should we have to work so hard? Why should we have to sit on the cushion and do all and yada, yada, yada? Well, sorry, that's just the way it works. So thank you all. Anyone else? We'll do one final exercise, but.
Dottie here.
Yes, Dottie.
We've talked about overloaded, so to speak, left brain. Do we also find people who are, so to speak, too right-brained?
I haven't met anybody like that.
Oh,
Well, I shouldn't say that. I haven't met anybody without a mental illness like that. I mean, I'm serious. In normal function, most of us still have a much more dominant left, in my opinion. And I'm just talking about what I see and I talk to people. So the answer is, Dottie, there may be, but I don't know who they are. I see way many more people in my life who are very left-brained. And again, we have a society, especially with social media, that's just really feeding that left brain like crazy. And, we need to be careful, I think. So,
Okay, thanks.
all right. So, I'm going back to the cushion, Wade, sorry. But I needed to take something with me before I did that. One of the geekiest people I know, and one of the people who is also extraordinarily spiritual, is a guy by the name of James Austin. If you notice, I haven't given you any references on anything to read by James Austin. And that's because he's pretty impossible to read. I have a background in medicine, and I've been a meditation practitioner for over 30 years, and I can't read him. I'm not optimistic, if you'd like to try. But he's a neuroscientist that really looks at stuff, and he's actually one of those people that has taken a Tibetan practice that is called sky gazing and modified it relating to what we know about modern neuroscience. I find that very interesting. So we were talking a little bit in the 7 o'clock session, people about the two broad types of meditation. There's concentrative meditation where you're paying attention to a specific thing or event. So following the breath is a concentrative meditation. Loving kindness is a concentrated meditation. They're kinds of things that we are doing as a task. The other part about it are things that are called receptive meditations, whereby the way we make an intention, or the way we actually do, in this case, a little bit of a posture, we kind of open ourselves up. If there's anything about enlightenment experiences that might happen, this might be something like that happen. I don't know. Again, my degree of openness and skepticism is very high in these areas, and I really kind of like that about this. So let's just kind of talk about the process. The normal, whatever you're sitting on a chair or anything, he suggests you do two different things to open your consciousness, or he's really talking about opening yourself up to the compassionate parts of your brain. Open hands facing the ceiling. That's the first part. Usually when I was giving instruction before, I said, now put your hands wherever you want. But he feels that's important. And that whether your eyes are open or closed, elevated about, and I don't know how you can figure this out, 30 degrees over normal and deviated towards the left. He feels that that's an eye position that makes a difference. And then, in here, not so interesting, but a really wonderful thing to do outside. I've done this with sunrises and sunsets and full. We had a blood moon last year. I did this with a blood moon. It was great, But and then there's nothing else to do. In other words, you don't have to follow your breath. You don't have to be anything except maybe if you need a kind of a kind of a process to reboot yourself if you find you're getting too lost in your consciousness, is just to say something like what and come back. It's completely open. The only thing that's important are the posture and just being open. So we'll do this for a few minutes, and then we'll end with one of my favorite poems. So we just open our consciousness, having a very open, broad posture. This exercise is called Selflessly Sky Gazing, and it's based on an old Tibetan tradition. And we just allow whatever is in the universe to come in there without chasing it away, without embellishing it, just allowing it to be. Our true heritage, the cosmos, is filled with precious gems. I want to offer a handful of them to you this morning. Each moment you are alive is a gem shining through and containing earth and sky, water and clouds. It needs you to breathe gently for the miracles to be displayed. Suddenly you hear the birds singing, the pines chanting. See the flowers blooming, the blue sky, the white clouds, the smile and the marvelous look of your beloved. You, the richest person on earth, who has been going around begging for a living, stop being the destitute child. Come back and claim your heritage. We should enjoy our happiness and offer to everyone. Cherish this very moment. Let go of the stream of distress and embrace life fully in your arms. And the wonderful statement of enlightenment. You know, there's a lot of enlightenments that have gone on, but very few people actually have a monument or a plaque for it. In Louisville, Kentucky, when crossing the street, the Trappist monk Thomas Merton had an enlightenment experience. And there's actually a plaque there. There's a plaque right on the street where Thomas Merton had this enlightenment experience. And this is what he said about it afterwards. It is a glorious destiny to be a member of the human race. Now I realize what we all are. If only they could see themselves as they really are, if only we could see each other that way all the time. There would be no more war, no more hatred, no more cruelty, no more greed. I suppose the big problem would be we would all fall down and worship each other. Wouldn't that be a nice thing? My dear friends, I have no idea. Well, I have a little bit of an idea, I think, because you've all given me some thanks individually. And I hope that I've been able to help you in some way on your path. I do know this, you've watered great seeds of joy in me just by being here. And I love having this particular experience. So I am very, very deeply grateful to you all. I think you're going to manifest as an index card. So just a few little kind of housekeeping things. You know, this retreat is a fundraiser for the Christine Center, which of course, as all places like this, got hit kind of hard during the pandemic. They couldn't hold retreats like this, which are some of their bread and butter. So please give generously if you thought you liked it, even if you didn't think you liked the retreat, but like the Christine Center, to kind of keep that in mind. I have 3 handouts here for today. One is this poem. Interestingly, this poem was a last-minute change. I had a Mary Oliver poem, which is also really wonderful. That's in your handout, but I changed my mind somehow to do that. And also, I have right up here is our summer retreat for people who want to go. That's stretch out for 5 days. It's mostly silent, so it's different than this. but we cover a lot of issues, and we're going to be talking about the 6 paramitas, which are these skillful means to kind of go from one shore of suffering to the shore of samsara, enlightenment, peace, whatever you want to call it, on the other side. So that's available to you as well. So I'm going to be hanging around a little bit. I'm going to go to lunch here if people want to track me down at lunch. And also in the last handout is my email address. I really enjoy dialogue with people. And if some of you even want to set up a Zoom meeting, now that we can do that, those of you who are, not close to Milwaukee, happy to do that as well. So I hope you all have a great success on your path. It looks like the day is windy, but dry. So maybe our drives back will be very good. So in my tradition, the one thing that we do when we bow to each other is we say, a lotus to you, a Buddha to be. I'm going to make that a little bit different, and I have for a long time. This is one of those things that's being in the Plum Village tradition that's really nice. You can do whatever you want, as long as you have that kind of heartfelt intention. I will bow to you and say, a lotus to you, the Buddha you are. You're not a Buddha to be. Right now you're a Buddha. So I hope we all can be inspired to act like that. A lotus to you, the Buddhas you are. Thank you.